Just finished Body Ink by Alan Dean Foster. Alan Dean Foster is an author that I have thoroughly enjoyed and admired for many years. Somewhere on that bookshelf behind me is the original copy of Orphan Star and the Vatarium Krang and The End of the Matter, which I got when I was about, I'm gonna say probably 15 or 16, and I never let go of them because I enjoyed them so much. This book is from a recent book haul. I think it might have been the December book haul rather than the November one. I glanced at it. It was on sitting down the shelf staring at me, and I was really tired one morning and I picked it up. I was just leafing through and I was hooked and I couldn't get away. So there's a few funny, cute things about it. Alan Dean Foster writes a lot of books for things like Alien, Star Trek, etc. But this is his own book, and because I was tired, I didn't realise that it was a volume 2 of The Tipping Point. I was way too impressed by the Panthers and way too little impressed by the information on the page. A few other interesting things about it are, it was published in 2012. I haven't read too much of Alan Dean Foster's more recent stuff, and I was really impressed by this book. Also, it's copyright by Thranx Incorporated. Now, for anyone who read the Pip and Flinks books, Thranx is the name for the race of intelligent insects which share the galaxy with humans. So I'm guessing that Thranx Inc. is Alan Dean Foster's own publishing company, which I find impressive. This is actually a Del Rey, but copyright by Thranx Inc. interested me. Anyway, so because of the Panthers, I'm going to blame the Panthers anyway. It was about one quarter in before I realised that this can't possibly be a number 1 book. It was a number 2, and then I googled it and I realised it was the centre one in a trilogy. I haven't read the first one, and that didn't matter because the writing's good enough. Alan Dean Foster has mastered the ability to make a book stand on its own legs, on its own behalf, even if it's a number whatever in a series. So well done, Alan Dean Foster, for that. Badly done, omnivorous reader, for not buying number 1 and 3 at the same time. Yeah. So in general, I always love the complexity of Alan Dean Foster's writing. His world building in particular, it's slippery to say what I actually like about it. Half the time I think it's his world building that I love, or it's his characters that I love, or it's the bit players that I love. A really good cyberpunk has to give you a lot of background, and this is really good cyberpunk. There's so many small concepts that sort of mesh together that give you this vibrant story background, and they flesh out the reading experience. And the original books that I read by Alan Dean Foster were more classic sci-fi, whereas this is more cyberpunk, and as ever I can't help comparing cyberpunk with William Gibson. There's definite writing differences in William Gibson and Alan Dean Foster, but there's a couple of similarities in terms of how complex and elaborate the world they build is, in which the plot activates. So William Gibson is famous for saying the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. He writes the future one step from now. But Alan Dean Foster in Body Ink has given us a future that is more significantly in the future. The Greenland ice cap has melted, we're told. Goodness knows what happened to Antarctica, that isn't mentioned. And as a consequence, large tracts of land that in 2023 are still land are now underwater to different degrees. It's changed the shape of cities. Those cities that have got hills behind them just grew up the slopes. Those ones that didn't drowned. It's changed the socio-dynamic powers in the world, so the countries are different as well. It's a good background. It's not overly done. Perhaps it's done more strongly in the first one, but in this one it's just mentioned. Okay, so our two heroes are Whisper, who is a thief, and a very basic street punk style, and he's a meld, more on that later, and Dr. Ingrid Seastrom, who has employed him to come with her and essentially kind of keep her alive and see that her mission succeeds. Anyway, both are Namericans, being as how North American has become Namerican, and that's part of the evolution of the socio-dynamics of this world. I gather that book number 1 happened in what is today North America. This one starts when they arrive in Africa. So they're on the run and they're being chased by nasty, nasty people who want to hurt them and take away this piece of futuristic technology around which the whole plot revolves. The Doctor wants to figure out what it is. She apparently found it in the head of a teenager, a girl who'd had unsuccessful MELD and had had that inserted, and then she found more background on it, that a lot of young people who are having unsuccessful MELDs come in to have them corrected but end up with these strange fibres in their head. These fibres are storage fibres out of a metallic type substance that shouldn't exist on Earth. No one can figure out what the information it's got in it, and the Doctor's decided she wants to trace it back to the origin company, which is called SICK. It's spelled S-A-E-C, but less respectfully just regard as SICK. That is the South African Economic Combine. Hence, they're in the southern part of Africa. Now, the Doctor's all about figuring out what the technology is, but Whisper only wants money, or subsys as it's called in the slang of the book. He also wouldn't mind getting Dr. Ingrid, but she's not cooperating with that goal. And the two have a very strong established relationship from the previous book. There are lots of small things that I think really make this book what it is, because in terms of plot, it's not that dramatic. Whisper and the Doctor arrive in South Africa. They're being chased. We find out a bit about their chase. There's a marvellous scene at the end of 3 of those chases. But you don't really know who they are. I'm not sure if I'd know more about that if I'd read the first book or not. It doesn't essentially matter that much. So they travel around Africa, Whisper using his street skills to keep them ahead of the people who are pursuing them. Part of his deal was he wanted to see wildlife in Africa, so they then go on a safari, and they're making their way slowly to the headquarters of SICK. So the plot itself is quite thinly spread, but what makes this book really good, and it makes it a very slow read. It took me a few days to get through this relatively short 288 page book, because the reading was so rich. And it's the small things that made it. The geographic redefining of the world, which was excellent, as I mentioned. The concept of MELDs in this book is a very cyberpunk notion. So on Goodreads, the description is a tomorrow where genetic manipulation has become ubiquitous, and the very meaning of what it is to be human is undergoing drastic transformation, whatever. But basically, you've got the manipulation, so it may be called they've got all sorts of terms for it. MELD is the most common one, where a human has chosen certain genetic changes and physiological changes, and that can include 6 arms, it can include huge ears, it can include having the top of your finger snip off so that you can interface with technology. That's a very William Gibson thing as well. Basically, the manipulated genetics that are available to humans in this future are kind of endless, and we see a lot of them in the story. And that was excellent. I really enjoyed that. So the way the society is structured around MELDs, people who have bioengineering, and naturals, like our Dr. Ingrid, who has never had them before, is what helps structure the society and helps structure the story. They're an integral part of the story. So the first concept to first introduction to the concept of MELD that you get, if you're like me and you didn't realise that this is number 2 when you started here, is in the African airport, where as Whisper and Dr. Ingrid arrive, 2 Black Panthers that are maniped go after someone who's trying to sneak in. They're part of the security team. And the way manipulation and human intelligence is put into these various animals. So you've got all sorts. You've got the panthers, you've got hyenas, etc. That's a really cool concept. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And it was a good introduction because it starts off the book with a zing. You get instantly sucked in and unable to put it down, like me. So well done, Alan Dean Foster. That was great. Another great concept, one of my favourite bit characters for this, is the Sangoma, which is a traditional healer woman that they go to in order to find information on how to reach Sex headquarters, which they're having a lot of trouble locating. The street smarts Whisper has lead him to her rather than to the actual location. So she's basically a witch doctor, but she's incorporated technology and a whole heap of modern tech with the witch doctoring. And the combination is excellent. She as a character is excellent. She doesn't appear for a long time, but I thoroughly enjoyed that part, and everything about her was great. When we meet her, she's taking Whisper and Ingrid up to her hut, and her hut is basically a hut on legs. Hello, Baba Yaga. So this town, I think it's meant to be Cape Town. I don't think it ever really says. But it's a town that used to be on flat ground, which is now underwater and is now a slum area where all the houses are on poles, and that sounds really interesting. But in order for the town to continue to exist, the houses have to sort of build up on the slopes. And the Sangoma's house is on legs because they need to constantly move to stay stable on the slope, which is in constant motion. Brilliant motion. Loved it. Okay, there's also when our two heroes are about to get mugged in some part of South Africa, they're rescued by an a cappella band of singing children, all of whom are carrying weapons. That was wild. Really liked it. Also, when they first arrive in Africa, there's this interesting character that Alan Dean Foster introduces to introduce the concept of colours and patterns that are being used by people. I think they call it rainbow patterns. Might be rainbow colours. To denote ancestry. So in this South Africa, which is integrated between white people and black people, people have got a lot of colour variation and a lot of ability to change the colour of their skin, colour of their hair, that sort of thing. More so than we have now. And it seems as if people colorize their skin into black and white, being the most popular in South Africa. Apparently Italy likes turquoise, we're told. So you've got some where half their face is black, the other is white. You've got other ones where you might have a background black with white ovals or white patterns. The way he describes it is really interesting and intriguing. And you know what? I don't think it's something that's ever going to really happen, but it's a damn fine idea. He also has the idea of a tattoo. It doesn't seem to be quite a tattoo. It seems to be a generated image as if you're wearing clothes, but when you're not, which he describes as good for tropical regions. Overall, like I said, I always love Alan Dean Foster's writing. The writing itself is gorgeous. His concepts in this book are wonderful. Quite like the cover. But his concepts are good, but the actual writing. So I'm going to read one paragraph. This is from page 66. Their table was built out over a shallow shelf of False Bay. In the distance, a swath of clouds, like brush strokes lifted from a turner, glowed a dying crimson over Seal Island. I just love that imagery. A landscape like a series of brush strokes lifted from a Turner painting. And I especially like the glowing crimson. I don't know if that's because Turner is noted for having used cheap crimsons in his pictures, so when we look at a Turner today, we don't actually know what colour it was when he painted it. So yeah, I just found that very evocative. And a lot of Alan Dean Foster's writing is evocative, and he borrows from a lot of different things, like the Baba Yaga hut walking around. There's a lot of small nods to previous influences. I don't get all of them. I know I don't, but I get more and more every time I continue reading things. Okay, so our two main characters, which we go through the entire story with, Whisper and Ingrid. To be honest, while they're both good characters, by page 140, I was a little bit over the antagonism between them. I found that the antagonism was becoming predictable and it seemed a little bit over the top, unnecessary. I don't know. I was a little bit over it. But the incredibly rich, futuristic, cyberpunk background meant that I could ignore it for a large part. And around about then is when they went on African safari. So yes, one of Whisper's terms and conditions for travelling around with Ingrid and keeping her safe, because she has no street smarts whatsoever. She has less street smarts than a 6-day-old kitten, and he is essentially keeping her alive. One of his target goals was he wanted to see animals. He wanted to see animals while he was in Africa. And at first, perhaps it says more about it in the first book, but I didn't know, so I just went, oh yeah, African safari. Well, Alan Dean Foster has some prizes for us. Yes, there's an African safari, they go on safari, it's very regulated. But as well as all the things that you would find on an African safari, in this future world, they have brought back extinct animals. And so there's a nod to the fact that there are thylacines now roaming the island of Tasmania. That's always going to wow my Australian heart. But in this African safari, as well as elephants and lions, you have smilodons and a whole heap of other stuff which is wild. I'm so glad I had Google while I was reading this book, because I'm not that up on extinct megafauna, and I wouldn't have known what some of them were. But with Google, I had a great time. So on the safari is when one particular assassin catches up with them. He apparently caught up with them in the previous book, but he's been slowly hunting them throughout this one. It's clear that he isn't the only interest hunting them, but he is suggested as the most dangerous. He's a very old assassin, and if you're old as an assassin, that's probably because you're pretty good at your job. He's tracking them. They roll their car semi-accidentally to get rid of him. He rolls his, continues chasing them through the undergrowth. They don't know he's still alive and chasing them. And just as he's about to catch up with them and do hideous things to them, he's foiled by a prehistoric sloth. And I can't tell you how much I loved that prehistoric sloth. I can't remember its name off the top of my head. And I'm not going to find it. I haven't tagged it, so I'm not going to find it. But yeah, if you're into the megafauna and you love the idea of an African safari where you're as likely to see extinct armadillo types as you are an actual elephant or cheetah, I really think you're going to love this book. On the whole, I really enjoyed it. It's probably not my perfect book. It might have been if I'd read number 1 first and if I had number 3 to go on to, because honestly that ending just isn't an ending. It stops with you waiting for the next one, which I don't have, and goodness knows if I'll ever find it. And by the time I find it, I'll probably have to reread this one. Anyway, so yeah. Didn't always love how antagonistic our two characters were. I didn't always love them in general. They had a few little weird inconsistencies. Like on page 151, Dr. Ingrid gets really angry at Whisper for making a joke about being a filch, not a finch, in a public place, because she thinks that's going to alert people to the fact that they're not regular tourists. But then less than a second later, in this equally public place, they start talking about their plans to break into the SIC headquarters. You'd think that'd be a bit more of a red flag than someone making a finch joke. And they do that constantly. It's like, I really don't know how it hasn't gotten them killed. Throughout this book, they're standing around on trains, in public places, in restaurants, just talking about the most unlikely plan. They're talking about breaking into somewhere that isn't even meant to exist. So, yeah. But aside from those two small things, and the fact that that isn't an ending, which is, as I said, my bad, this is a really good book. If you have got the whole series, I'd love to hear how it went when you read it in proper sequence. And yeah, I do look forward to number 1 and number 3 if I can find them. So yeah, thank you for watching. As always, comment, subscribe, tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm right. Or if you're about to read this book, and I think there's at least one other booktuber out there who is, I'd love to hear what other people think about it.